Note that all mobile phones must be switched off as they interfere with the recording. Could you please ensure that your phone is actually switched off, not just on silent? Could you remind anyone in the public gallery that at this stage it's not permissible to bring any electronic devices into the public gallery, and can I remind you to declare your interest as appropriate throughout the meeting? Apologies, Mervyn Story, Stephen Moutry, Trevor Lunn, and Jonathan saying he'll be late. Any others?
I'm going at a 11:15.
You're at 11:15. What's that quorum we need?
We may be in trouble, so anyway.
Would someone chase? Yeah, okay. Okay. Chairperson's business. First of all, elective home education. As you're aware, the Education and Library Boards are consulting on a new elective home education policy. The new policy includes a multidisciplinary check for those intending to educate their children at home, an annual visit and Department of Education approval for SEND statements which don't identify a grant-maintained school. The consultation closes in June, and I propose that, as is usual, we seek a briefing on the feedback to the consultation after this, and that we then consider our views. I haven't actually seen documentation. Is it
in correspondence?
It's in. Okay, good. So is that agreed?
Yeah.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you. The draft minutes previous meeting are of the 30th of April 2014 at pages 6 to 12 of the pack. Any comments? Are the draft minutes agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising, I have none. Anyone else?
No.
Okay. Just before we... Just want to swap my notes around. Okay, please. Item 5, special education needs. Members, following our scrutiny of issues relating to school children with visual impairment, today we continue our consideration of access to health services by school children. Today our focus is on access to health services by school children, and our first briefing is from the Public Health Agency and the Health and Social Care Board with the Department of Education and the Belfast Education and Library Board. The clerk's cover note is at pages 16 to 30, and you'll find a briefing paper from the Public Health Agency and related correspondence and papers from page 48. The College of Occupational Therapists has provided additional information in tabled items. So if I can welcome today, a large number of you today, but very welcome. We have Dr. Eddie Rooney, Chief Executive, Public Health Agency. I need to put my specs on. Second from the right, this is Michelle Tennyson, Assistant Director, Allied Health Professionals and Personal and Public Involvement from the Public Health Agency, Mrs. Caroline Gillan, Director of Access, Inclusion and Wellbeing from the Department of Education, Dr. Claire Mangan, Chief Executive, Belfast Education and Library Board, Mr. Tony Rogers, Acting Director of Social Care and Children from the HSCB, and Mr. Kieran McShane, Social Care Commissioning Lead, also from the HSCB. We have 20 minutes, and I look forward very much to hearing from you. We were very much moved by what we were told last week when it came to visual impairment, and it very much showed us just one aspect of everything. So I look forward very much to hearing
Thank you
from
very much, Chair. Thank you very much for the invitation to give evidence to the Committee on Interagency Connectedness. You've asked for information in 4 specific areas, 3 of which relate directly to the Public Health Agency, and I'll cover these in a couple of minutes.
Great.
First, it might help just to explain why interagency connectedness is so central to our work. We were established under the 2009 Health and Social Care Act, which provides a very general duty on PHA to protect and improve health and social well-being of the whole population. But the legislation is also quite specific on our duty to cooperate with other bodies who contribute to that health and well-being. Although in general we don't deliver services directly. We do provide information, advice and assistance to those who do. We work very closely with health service providers, particularly through our professional leads, such as Michelle. We also provide support to the Health and Social Care Board, which has overall responsibility for performance management and service improvement within health. But that support also stretches to all bodies across all sectors who contribute to health and well-being. We work closely with most departments, statutory bodies such as the Education and Library Boards, and local government increasingly, and especially with the voluntary and community sector, and we fund just about 600 voluntary and community sector bodies on every aspect of health and well-being. Certainly the sense that I get and have had over the last couple of years is that both at a strategic level we've been seeing quite a drive to promote interagency and intersectoral cooperation. We're seeing that at the highest levels in suicide prevention, mental health and early years. We're also seeing it cascading down among the providers. We'll hear from Tony shortly in relation to Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, but on many other groups that we're all involved in one way or another. I'm heavily involved, for example, in the Belfast Strategic Partnership, which brings about 30 stakeholders together from local government, health and education, and has really taken steps to break down barriers between the organisations to align planning and delivery in a much stronger way than we've done in the past. In all aspects of this, children and young people are central in the collaborative working. From our perspective, giving every child the best start in life is a fundamental building block for long-term health and well-being, and it's clear that joint working of health and education sectors is crucial to building a healthier society. If we could move, Chair, to the areas which you've identified, I'll cover the review of the allied health professional services to children with statements of special education needs, a group which I chair. I'll also briefly mention about the state of play in relation to the review of multidisciplinary teams, which is a joint PHA and Health and Social Care Board led, and the regional training unit PHA pilot on emotional health and well-being. Tony will cover the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, which is led by the Health and Social Care Board and in which we all participate. I'm not going to go through line by line, but maybe I could draw out just some of the key points, particularly in relation to the review of the allied health professional support, which is our most recent and indeed a very live review for us. I have to say, from our perspective, certainly my own, it's a review that's been stimulated for the right reasons. This has come very much from the bottom up. It's from feedback from the front line and indeed from MLAs and others with an interest in this area. Were there concerns about coordination and indeed getting the greatest impact in terms of the use of what is a very precious resource in support for children? I chair the review. We've got very strong and high senior representatives from both DHSS and the Department of Education, as well as the Education Library Boards and Health Trusts, all involved within this review. Indeed, Caroline and Claire both involved in it, as Kieran and indeed Michelle. So I think it's a very good example of us really getting our sleeves rolled up together on a very meaty topic. The first phase of the review is focused on support for children with statements in special schools. We've spoken to principals in every school and are completing our process of formal engagement with parents and children. We've also been engaging with the professions. The second phase will focus on children in mainstream schools, and indeed we may well be extending beyond that to children without statements in due course. The reason why we're phasing is because it's got a lengthy review, and we want to make sure that the results which we expect are going to be relevant for every area. We're not waiting 2 years before we're actually getting those addressed at the earliest possible opportunity. Key themes emerging at this stage, and we're just finishing the evidence gathering in phase one. We still haven't completed the report on it, and still a few bits to come in. But already there are a few key themes coming out in that. One is that allied health provision is valued very highly. There's a lot of good practice around different parts of the country. But there's clearly message coming on scope for better coordination between trusts and schools in planning and provision of service. And that includes making sure that there are no gaps in terms of the service for children, particularly during school holiday periods. There also will be we're expecting quite a strong message coming from it in terms of maximising the time that the professionals spend in caring for children and reducing the amount of time that's spent on both bureaucracy and indeed on other issues around this. So even at this stage, we're clear that there is going to be a very substantive and major job to be done, and that will involve the sectors working in a much more close way than at any time in the past. But we will report on that to the committee as soon as we get the Phase 1 report done. We'll be very happy to share that with you, Chair.
When do you have a rough idea when that?
Well, we're literally, when we're gathering it, we're waiting for some of the final information. Part of that engagement is involved directly with young people, and we want to make sure that we get that phase completed. So we are talking about over the next couple of months.
Okay, thank you.
In relation to the review in multidisciplinary teams, and again, I think this is a review that was undertaken for the right reason, and that is that we had a particular arrangement which was set up prior to the review of public administration, what as I suppose wasn't unusual at the time. In looking at multidisciplinary teams across the Trust, we had 5 models of it, and really the emphasis has been on trying to get a much more coherent, much more consistent model. The review part has been undertaken, and now the focus is on developing a regional model which will be consistent and stronger than we've got at present. We have that proposals for that have been already developed in the last month, and we'll put those forward for consultation and discussion with the stakeholders. In relation to the RTU PHA pilot and optimising achievement through a whole school approach in emotional health and wellbeing, this pilot programme ran last year in 15 schools as an effort to embed emotional health and wellbeing firmly into the culture of schools. The evaluation of the pilot was positive, and we will be working with RTU, indeed with the department, if the programme is to be rolled out to a wider range of schools. That pilot was one of a number of programmes under the I Matter initiative, which has been in place since 2007. The focus on that has been building resilience among pupils and within schools. And our involvement in the PHA has been particularly in the self-assessment of schools and the development of a toolkit which is underway, and the provision of resources to schools in all aspects of health and well-being. One of the recent developments under this has been the Primary Schools Award, and this is really an award to show those schools that have shown exceptional standards in supporting the emotional health and well-being of families. And I do think it's a good example of one of those awards that's really been stimulated, in this case, by one family in one school who wanted to show their appreciation for the fantastic support they got from the teacher and all the pupils for their child who was terminally ill. And that has really stimulated and inspired, I have to say, all of us who've been involved in it to really try to get a new initiative on health and well-being, looking at emotional health and well-being, that will really spread to other schools. So I believe certainly there are a lot of positive developments there. If I can hand over to Tony at this stage.
Chair, thank you very much, members. You've received information in respect of the Children and Young People Strategic Partnership, and you see that its origins are within legislation going back to the Children's Services Planning Order. And that was in the legacy arrangement, so each of the legacy health and social services boards had its own partnership. With the advent of the review of public administration and the development of the regional board, then we had responsibility to convene a regional strategic partnership with representation at the most senior level, really right across the piece in terms of all statutory, voluntary and community agencies. And I think we've shared the membership with yourselves. Below the childcare, the strategic partnership, then we have a range of other infrastructure, including outcomes groups which operate at the trust level and coterminous with trust, and again multi-agency partnerships, and at that outcomes group level then they become more involved in the commissioning across again on a multi-agency basis. And then below that we have locality planning groups, and that really is about involving communities and parents, carers and children in all of our planning. And I think we have further information if the committee should wish that at any stage in terms of the involvement of parents, carers and children in that. We've also indicated about both the outcomes groups and regional working groups, and for the purpose of this committee and the topic in question today, then you'll see from the submission that we have regional working groups for children and young people with disabilities. We have a project around Think Child, Think Family, Think Parent, Think Family, which is about mental health within a family context and the implications for children. We have a working group around transitions for young people with disabilities into adulthood, and we have a working group looking at children with emotional and behavioural difficulties. So I suppose in terms of the partnership, it's our view that that is a reflection and demonstration of our commitment to interagency connectedness and trying to bring all of the relevant partners together. It provides opportunity clearly for interagency communication and for all of those agencies to share both their strategic intent, where they're seeking to make investments, and seek, where possible, to harmonise that to the best extent possible. And we've also significant and we feel fairly rich information database, and again we make that available on a widespread basis, and it's available across the web, and obviously the locality planning groups with parents and children, young people, then have access to that and can inform us about future direction. And you'll see a reference there to also linkages with the Family Support NI website. And again, we're seeking to have emphasis within the arena of early intervention, and clearly seeking to provide support at the earliest possible stage to avoid further difficulties. I think, concurring with what Eddie had said earlier, the Childcare Partnership affords us an opportunity to align planning and delivery. It does provide us with significant opportunity, we feel, for to hear the voice of parents, carers, children, young people, and they are actively with us at the table. We seek to use it to try and avoid duplication, and probably, which I think is an issue for all of us, to seek to reduce the overarching bureaucracies. And we do try to work hard at harmonising our processes where possible. That's as much as I would choose to say at this stage, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'm very impressed by hearing how you pull everything working together. I mean, is there any, given that you're all mainly driven by the health side, and I think resourced by the health side, is there anything missing that's hindering you doing the job that you're trying to do at the moment, of doing the review?
No, not at all. Certainly not in the review of special education. Do you mean? Yeah.
Yep.
No, there's. Say this is a review which we have undertaken. It's been driven by the Public Health Agency, very much from the point of view of trying to do everything that we possibly can to make the service as effective as it possibly can. There's been no pressure on us, certainly not to go slow on it or anything else, or indeed to narrow the focus on it whatsoever. It's a hugely important area for us. And I think if there's one constraint on it, it is the complexity and the breadth of the area. It's enormously complex. But I have to say that even the first phase of it, and indeed our interviews which we've done with every special school at the moment, have given us such a rich tapestry of information.
I'm sure they have. Yes.
Incredible.
Caroline?
Just to add, in terms of facilitating the review, and you're saying if there's any obstacles or hindrances, obviously one of the key elements of successfully completing the review was the input from education, and education is facilitating that in terms of engagement with special schools. Claire and myself are on the project board, so it has been important, and the Minister, Minister O'Dowd, did support or has agreed that his department and indeed the boards would help to facilitate the Public Health Agency in taking forward the review.
Very good. That's really why I asked.
Yeah,
I asked because it's vital. The other thing that was sort of running through my mind was, because it's so complex and it could take a long time, what happens if you find something that needs changing now? Is there a mechanism within it to feed it straight either to us, to the
Yeah, absolutely, and that's what the phasing has allowed us to do. I mean, when we pull together the first phase report, what we expect is that there will be a number of core issues that will follow into the same issues that we will expect to see in mainstream schools and indeed by children who don't have statements of special education need. And I think those are the ones that really are important to address in an early stage. What I don't want to happen is that we end up sequentially dealing with that. That is, we spend a couple of years getting the information together, and then we spend several years trying to deal with some of the core issues, about particularly those that have emerged in the early stage on it. So we'll be certainly making sure, as much as we can, that we're working in parallel on these issues. That is, we're getting the core issues up, and we begin the work, which itself is going to be a lengthy enough process, but we begin that work on those issues that are clearly going to have the greatest impact.
Will you build into it a mechanism so it's an ongoing review, always, forever, and it's going? Because it seems so often we do a review, it happens, set up, and then we move on to the next thing instead of it continually checking itself.
Well, this is a review with an edge and with purpose, and we will make sure that that's followed through.
Yeah, very good. Sure. Sean, you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. You're very welcome. A number of questions. First, in terms of the RTU pilot, emotional health and wellbeing, why is there not a business case been presented to the department a year after the pilot's finished?
Well, perhaps I could respond to that. An evaluation was carried out by the provider of the course straight after the course. I mean, it was essentially an evaluation of the actual training course rather than the longer term impact. The department, the Minister has agreed that we will approach RTU. There's a number of issues that would require to be considered before RTU or anybody would produce a business case with a view to rolling out the training. I mean, the training that was delivered was to 15 schools across nursery, primary and post-primary, and there may be issues there around the appropriateness or whether of the course to all of those sectors or whether any tweaks would be required. There's also issues around sustainability of the interventions, you know, how do the schools carry through and what they've learnt on the 3 days, and also practical issues around this particular course was rolled out over 3 days to the schools. If you were to cover all schools and roll it out to all schools, that could take almost 5 years. So we need to consider issues around appropriate rollout, and also in conjunction with that, I'm aware that the boards also have a capacity building programme for schools which includes emotional health and wellbeing of teachers, and there may be issues around, you know, what's the most appropriate way to fully roll out an emotional health and wellbeing programme on a whole school approach. So we want to engage with RTU on those issues and also with board colleagues who are responsible for the capacity building to look at, you know, that these materials are very good and this is definitely very positive feedback, but it's not an end package or a complete package. There are issues we'd like to develop and consider. So it would be only after we looked at those before any business case prepared by, you know, whether it's RTU or somebody else in terms of rollout. So those are the issues.
If there's ongoing work on it, when would you expect sort of a business case to be?
It's really dependent upon, you know, bottoming out those issues. I mean, as we said, you know, the cost of delivering a course across schools, you know, those are, in the department, in terms of capacity building, we have to tackle the very difficult issue is how do you roll out training to schools now? What's the most effective way? Is there a combination of e-learning, virtual classrooms, as well as face-to-face? And, you know, those are issues we're tackling in a number of different areas, and this is no different. I mean, maybe Claire could speak about some of the capacity building, the boards. also have a capacity building element in terms of emotional health and well-being.
Over the past number of years, some of the boards have been developing courses and have been delivering courses to schools around facilitating the mental health and capacity of the school as a community. And that was really looking at the wider issues in terms of not just the mental health and well-being of pupils, but also of staff. Because as we move forward in relation to looking at a school as part of a wider community, it was felt that staff as well as pupils have a right to have their needs met within that context. So in some of the boards, in Southern and Western Board, programmes of that nature have been disseminated to schools. So I think before we progress this any further, I think we need to bring clarity and coherence to what would be deemed to be a regional approach in relation to this. One that meets the needs of different types of schools, whether you're meeting the needs of a nursery, a primary or a post-primary. Because the other aspect of this is that the developmental needs of children in relation to emotional health and well-being, whilst those needs are still present in all groups, the means by which you would address that need might be different. So I think we need to, in a sense, benefit from the work that's been done by RTU, look at other work that has been done before we're in a position to be clear about what is the appropriate dissemination framework for this on a regional basis.
So even this report, the report or the case studies haven't been disseminated to schools? Even?
They have been, the materials have obviously been developed and they have been piloted in the 15 schools thus far, but I don't believe any further than that at this stage.
Would you not think it would have been a good idea, for example, even that report and even the case studies were disseminated to schools so that maybe schools could take this on themselves?
Well, I think there's possibly issues with just issuing materials to schools without, I think the whole aim of the course was also the supporting 3-day delivery. I think there could be issues, especially in the area of emotional health and well-being, of simply giving schools written materials without any follow-up support. So, I mean, as Claire says, I mean, this is a piece of work that, I mean, emotional health and well-being is certainly an important area of work, and capacity building of schools is an important area of work, and this pilot is a very helpful element, and the evaluation of it, but it does raise other questions in terms of developing things as we move forward. One thing I would say that came through very strongly in the pilot, and which we've been aware of, is the importance of leadership and the importance of the buy-in from the principal, because that really is key in terms of having the whole school, whole community approach. So it was very positive feedback from the actual training course, and it's certainly something we want to consider as we're moving forward.
Okay, thank you. And in your opening comments, I detected that you did realise that there are issues out there. And I don't know why it's my background in education or what it is, but I am getting lots of serious issues about the linkage between health and education, particularly in early years. You know, just to give you one example, and I mentioned this yesterday, a child 2-year-old with development needs. It has taken that mother 6 months to get an appointment at Child Development Clinic. And again, no reflection on the staff, because they are very much under pressure. That child has had 45 minutes of speech therapy since Christmas. He's had 4 physio appointments and 1 OT. And I must stress, I know the staff are under pressure and whatever. But the point here is 6 months is a long time in the development of a young child. What's wrong?
I suppose my first reaction is that my motivation is to ensure that the needs of the children are met. That will be the starting point. It's quite difficult when you don't know the details of the case as to whether a decision has been made by the clinician that actually is the appropriate level. Certainly the parent's perception is that it's not the appropriate level in terms of sharing the information with you, but my position would be that the needs of the children should be met. I can't comment any further on the particular case.
I understand that, but I think you would understand the concerns of the parent,
Yes,
who's really parents are doing their best here, but just feel that they're not being listened to.
One of the issues that has arisen in the past from parents is the need for enhanced communication and that partnership working as part of developing the plans around the care and management of the child, ensuring that the parent is a partner within that arrangement, and certainly those principles we're putting very strongly in place in the review of the AHP input into the schools programme, the review of the multidisciplinary teams. And to that end, we've taken our responsibilities around personal and public involvement very seriously and put considerable efforts in to actually hearing the views of the parents and using those views on an equal basis to the views of the clinical staff. We haven't come to the end point, but we're absolutely clear we want to hear the good and the bad.
Can I just to emphasise that as well? In the review, I mean, we've got both a survey of parents directly to parents, as well as have been meeting with groups of parents, and we'll be meeting with the children as well directly. And the strength of feeling is coming through. I mean, we've entered into this review to make sure that we do hear things as they are in terms of the experiences of the parents, and the levels of frustrations, of fears and just concerns that the people have for the welfare of their children, making sure that the system is operating as effectively as possible, is coming through very, very loudly through that and very directly to us. And say we're very, very aware, very conscious of that, and I do think that absolutely all want to make sure that we respond to that.
I respect what you say and understand the significant pressures that staff are under because of the staffing issues. But, you know, the theory or what's coming across from this table, the reality is totally different out there. There's a lot of very frustrated parents. I could go on about this for hours, but another parent whose child is in P6 or P7, told he's a wee bit slow or whatever, getting nowhere in terms of getting any special help to get his ADHD or the dyslexia sorted out. There's a lot of frustration out there. There's a lot of help needed. And then if you take that on a wee bit further, and in a recent answer to questions, to complete the statutory process in terms of finalising a statement, if you look across the boards, can take up to 6 months. This is not far too long.
Well, part of the SEN review, which we'll probably touch on in the next session, the proposal is to reduce the timescales from 26 weeks down to 20 weeks, and then the whole theory behind that is also to reduce the 5 stages of the framework down to 3, and certainly the motivation in the SEN review was to create a framework and a process that was much more user-friendly and more accessible to parents and pupils in terms of accessing support. But no doubt we'll touch on that in the second session.
Chair, if I might also say the statutory assessment framework has statutory timelines within it. And in that regard, there's some aspects of this that require a minimum of 4 weeks. So that there are actually aspects of the existing legislative framework that have timelines built into it that relate to the 26-week period. So that there would need to be adjustments, amendments to the legislation to effect a reduction in the timeline in relation to the statutory assessment process. So we are operating within the process that currently is.
Even before you get to the statement process, Claire, you know, it takes so long. Parents feel they're up against a brick wall in terms of getting, first of all, you know, as a parent, if your child has a particular learning difficulty, it can take a wee while for parents to acknowledge that themselves. But once they acknowledge that, they are finding it they're up against a brick wall in terms of getting any help out there. And, you know, the whole process could take over a year.
I know that parents, I mean, as you know, I worked in the past as an education psychologist, and I've worked very closely with parents. Parents sometimes do take a little while to understand fully the nature of their child's difficulties, and when they do understand it, they want help immediately. I think that's very much an emotional reaction to the situation, and it's a very appropriate one. I think it's important always to realise that if children are in settings, whether it's a preschool setting or whether it's in school, the school also has a duty to work to meet the needs of the child, and whilst board services are there to support and bring additionality to that, I think we can't obviate the fact that schools need to ensure that everything that can be done within the school's existing resources is done. And so in that regard, yes, steps need to be taken to expedite support in certain particular cases. But there's also a lot of work that can be done at school-based level, and that's one of the reasons why over the past few years we've been promoting the SEN resource file and other materials that give schools very specific guidance on the support that they can provide to children and families in relation to specific areas of SEN need.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I think what Sean's brought up is what we've all met in all our patches. It's this time. It's always waiting and waiting, and you're quite right with the emotion and it being the appropriate reaction. But that's why I asked my question at the beginning, if you pick up something that needs changing immediately, and that seems to be the tightest focus, but it's very complex.
Mayor, can I just say through and made reference to it with the strategic partnership that we do have a range of family support hubs and seeking to roll those out. It really is just seeking to address the issue about seeking to try and afford families the opportunity at the earliest possible stage to know what assistance and what help's out there. I know that there are other formal processes that follow through, but it really is at times that for some families where they feel where do I turn now and what would be available to us, that we are seeking through the family support hubs to try and provide that level of coordination.
Okay, thank you. There were two things that arose from what Sean was asking, and one is the statutory role, because the Department of Education advised in 2012 that they wanted a statutory obligation on the Health and Social Care Trust, and yet the DHSSBS disagreed, and yet you've just said that we need to change legislation to get it all in place.
Well, we're changing the legislation in relation to the SEN framework, which is obviously within our remit in the Department of Education. The Education Minister is unable to impose any statutory requirements on another department. So, and I mean, Eddie or one of my colleagues will be able to present the Department of Health view, but that would be very much that they're already under an obligation under the Children's Order, I believe it is, to provide for children in need and those with a disability. So there's no proposal, certainly in our legislation, that will be coming forward that will impose a statutory obligation on health.
Can the Health and Social Care Board advise what the impact would be on its operations if there were inescapable statutory obligations to provide non-educational support services to school children?
I suppose it's a difficult question, Chair.
Yeah.
I suppose under our current legislative framework, we require under the Children's Order to support children in need and their carers and their families, and to maintain families together as long as possible. I suppose the issue around supporting children with special educational needs as opposed to simply children with disabilities, because I chair the regional group for children with disabilities, and there are distinctions between the thresholds. Not all children with disability will have a threshold regarding a special educational needs statement. Not all children with statements will have a disability. In terms of the numbers, my understanding at this point in time, we're about 2.8% of the primary school population and 3.8% of the post-primary school population are within the code of conduct. That's about 70,000 children within the service. It's a significant resource allocation. I think the only way that has been alluded to and discussed this morning is the importance of partnerships. And Mr. Rogers made reference to the importance of early years. We've just been involved with a partnership arrangement under the Right Start strategy for early years, or particularly for children with disabilities who aren't able to access early years provision, and yet it's a very important aspect in terms of their lives, in terms of their development. Under that initiative, we were able to commit about £350,000 and support children who never would have had that opportunity to have those developments met through that setting. That has been independently evaluated. It has been supported as being very, very worthwhile and significant outcomes for those children. The other interesting point about that is we've roughly about 5,000 children in Northern Ireland who want our children's disability teams, but we've got 16,000 children on DLA. Well, a lot of children get their services the same way as any other child. It's making sure that they're targeted at the right point. I think just in terms of that strategy where we rolled that out, it has been very worthwhile. The difficulty is you had mentioned resource. We've been given no commitment that that resource is going to be available in the future. So in some ways there is you raise expectations, but it needs to be continued. There needs to be continued source for it. So that is one of the challenges, and the funds come from developing social change. So we will certainly be hopeful that that will continue, because that really is the early intervention for a lot of families and around inclusion. So, but it gives you an idea of in terms of the task.
Thank you. I mean, it seems so that if you make everything statutory, you then force the need for the resources to be able to do it, and yet you're sort of implying that the resource then that's needed is vast and it's more complex.
Yeah, I think, just to clarify, the issue is that we assess children and health on an assessment of need.
Okay.
So that is the starting point. So in terms of the assessment of need, we'll determine the services. You will have two children, perhaps with the same condition, but have very, very different needs in terms of what's around in terms of family support. So that is our starting point in health, and that then dictates our powers and duties under legislation. Is that our trusts have the power to undertake an assessment, but once that assessment indicates that a child is a child in need, that becomes a statutory function under existing legislation.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Chris.
Thanks, sir, and thanks, guys, for the presentation to date. If I could maybe ask around the fluctuation in services available, across the north, are we seeing an equality issue here, where a child in one particular spot will be in receipt of particular services free of charge on one particular road, but if you go a certain miles down the road, it's completely different? A family then maybe has to pay large sums of money to receive the exact same service that is free of charge, again at the other opposite end of a road. Surely there's an equality issue here that was, if to be challenged, would perhaps lead us up a troubled road.
Certainly from a point of view of the early information coming out and the review of AHP services, there are certainly major disparities depending on which special school you happen to be in geographically. Not clear where those disparities have come from, how they've emerged over time, but clearly they are there, and that is definitely one of the issues that we will be focusing on.
So what gives an idea then of the targets being set to eradicate such fluctuations? Or
Well, I'm only analysing the information at this stage, so Chris,
okay,
it's still a very early stage to understand it. What we're trying to do is really to peel back to understand what is driving that, the extent to which that happens to be just the locality of the professionals as to where they're used to operating out, or those who are linked into specific schools or traditionally linked into there. From our point of view, the issue, it is a fundamental issue in making sure that the services are available for every child who needs them, regardless of where they are. So it's really understanding what the driver is, and then we will look very, very closely in terms of what we need to do to address that.
Yeah, certainly, because one of the earliest statistics I seen coming onto this committee last year was around it could take up to 10 times as long to see an educational psychologist in the southeastern area as it does in Belfast, and that's just alarmed. It's shocking. Something that does need to be eradicated.
Can I say on behalf of South Eastern Board that I know that over the past year they have worked very, very hard to reduce that anomaly. And I think that if you looked at more recent statistics and related to it, the situation has significantly improved at that particular point in time.
Might be useful, Chair, might be useful also to add, Dr. Rainey has acknowledged some of the inequalities or inequities in service provision, and you had raised the question around what targets might we have in place to resolve that. I think it might be useful to add, professionally, one of the pieces of work that we will do, be it in the review of AHP input into schools or the multidisciplinary teams, is work with partners and parents and children to agree models of practice. So what is the right thing to do for our children to achieve the outcomes that we require? What would that look like in terms of service delivery, and then spread the agreed model through the system? Whether or not you attach targets to that or not remains a question, but the models are very, very important, and it's the models that we have to spend a lot of time being informed by the very people that use our services.
Can I ask just one final question? And it's away from all of this statement and process, etc. It's around the mental health, even the sexual health needs of young people in our post-primary schools. And very often there's an idea that it's not really, the advice and everything else isn't what it should be, that it's perhaps, decades out of date and everything else. Is that something that, you see yourself, or is it something that needs to be enhanced? Again, it's just really looking some opinions on it. It's some anecdotal evidence that I hear back all the time. It'd be interesting to hear, which is...
Yeah, well, we're very interested in all the issues that contribute to health and well-being, really are pushed up the agenda. And it's not simply in terms of putting packages in school. It really is about, as we talked earlier, around emotional health. It's getting that cultural shift in terms of health and well-being as part of the day-to-day fabric of schools, but also putting that in a very accessible way, so it's easy for the schools to draw down on their resources and share expertise around that. I mean, one of the proposals at the moment, which we've mentioned in the briefing, is the establishment of something that used to exist about 15 years ago, of a health education strategic liaison group, literally to allow us a forum to look at all the range of issues, because I mean, there's so many, from childhood obesity through to mental health, which is always causing us a huge amount of anxiety in terms of tackling that, through sexual health and issues. And that range of issues really is these are areas that are developing areas and vibrant areas. And it's really having a group that allows us really to put our heads together to make sure that we're continually getting the best information and making sure that we've got mechanisms to share that as effectively as we can. So it's a whole, I mean, we're interested in the whole agenda.
When do you foresee that group coming?
I know that the proposals are, I think, we're trying to get it up and running before the summer. So
I would add also, I mean, the emotional health and well-being part of our area of work in the department is certainly developing. I mean, we obviously have counselling in post-primary schools at the moment. We hope to look at models for primary schools in the coming year. And as Eddie mentioned earlier, we've developed an audit tool for schools, which is really for them to look at how they're doing in terms of emotional health and well-being and what gaps they need to fill. Now, at the moment, we're hoping to put that online, and we're engaging with IT folks around that. We've also had the Elementor leaflets, which Eddie referred to earlier. So, and there's the personal development strands of the curriculum, both in primary and post-primary, are looking at emotional health and well-being. So it's a live area of work that we're constantly developing, and as you say, the issues are constantly changing and need to be kept up to date.
Chair, can I just say that I think this debate is at the kernel of the whole discussion on interconnectedness.
Yes.
And I think that emotional health and well-being, we need to take it right back to the early years. And I think that's what we've all been involved in. So it's just within that context that I think some of the work is progressing.
Thank you. Now, I had asked them to turn the mics up, because we're finding it a bit hard. It's getting a bit noisy. Sean, you wanted to come in?
Just a wee point on Chris's first point. When are we going to get, in the absence of ESA, when are we going to get a sort of joint approach from the boards and this thing, and in fairness and in support of the South East Board? If I live in Newcastle and I have a child with autism, I can get help through the Sunrise programme. But if I live in Allalong, I can't get help. So when are we going to get that sort of joint up, even a better joint up from our boards?
Well, actually, in terms of autism, the boards would consider that we have worked very hard since the establishment of autism services in the 5 boards. We have an interboard autism-specific group which meets with the managers of the autism services in the 5 boards. I think what we could be veering into are issues around particular preferences around interventions. The reality is that we have a very consistent training now that's delivered to schools. We have early years programmes that are delivered by our early years ASD services. In other words, there's part of ASD services that can provide early years support. So I think that there's perhaps more consistency than people realise, and maybe it is our fault that we're not, in a sense, communicating the coherence within those arrangements in a much more explicit way. If there are differences, I think it's important also to emphasise that it isn't a one intervention fits all. Autism is a spectrum disorder, and within that there will be some interventions that will be deemed to be more appropriate for some children than others. So if there's a difference between one child and another, it may be because the assessed need indicates that something different is actually required.
So from a regional approach, you don't see any changes, given that the Minister's decided he's going to concentrate now on rebooting the library boards and concentrating on getting the boards in line with new councils. It won't complicate any of what you're doing.
I think we've been trying over the past number of years to bring more coherence to the key principles of what we're doing, and to have developmental strands of work across the age ranges. I think if we move forward in a different context than the one that was perhaps envisaged, if that is the case, then we need to be more explicit about the consistency and coherence that exists, and where there are disparities, we work hard to redress those.
Thank you very much. Robin.
Thank you, Chair, and again, members, very welcome. When you come to this number in the questioning, your questions tend to have been answered, some of them anyway, and I was very, Mr Rogers' questions around this communication and support and a plan, and I think it was initially to Michelle. Other members of the team started to support that. And my second question was around the point, because East Belfast is verging on the Belfast and the southeastern area, that point was very much in my mind. Can I just ask at the end of the day, in terms of Northern Ireland, how will we benchmark against other parts of the UK in providing the service when you finally arrive at your end point, if there ever is an end point? How will we compare with other parts of the UK?
In terms of the review of AHP in the schools, we've actually undertaken some work to establish what is actually happening in the other countries.
Yeah.
To start that benchmarking right away, I have to say that Northern Ireland are leading the way in this area of work, and actually some of the other countries are looking to us for the results. How we then benchmark when there's nothing available, I'm not sure. But there is something internally for us, and I think was picking up on the Chair's point earlier, that we've got to see this as an ongoing process to ensure we meet the needs of the children. It's not a one-off project. So I think we'd be benchmarking ourselves in the first instance and working with partners in other countries to watch how that progresses.
If you were to pick an area, where would you believe the best services are provided across the world?
I'm not sure we have that information quite yet.
Well, we keep getting compared with Finland, for example. How does Finland compare in terms of its overall education? We keep getting compared with other parts of the world. How do we?
I think it is an area that people are looking at, and there was actually, I wasn't part of it, but there was a study visit to Finland recently, and I think that probably showing some of the measures that have taken place and the investment that they're making in early years, and the issues about when children go to school and so forth. But I think the outworking of it, and I think that's why people are still reflecting upon it, they still have increasing numbers of children coming into their child protection system, into the looked after system, and interfacing with their justice system. So I think there are bits that they're feeling are positive, but yet they're still struggling to understand how some of the outcomes aren't being delivered in the manner in which they would like. And that might be just about the complexity of society and where we're going societally.
Chair, if I may comment, I actually was on that Finnish educational visit, and certainly the reason why Finland was chosen in the first instance as a potential location was because of their academic performance. It's very clear that Finland invests heavily in the early years. They invest very heavily, not just in assessment in the early years. In fact, they focus more on intervention and services and less emphasis on assessment. It was also very clear that their view was that if the investment in time and skilled staff in the early years was having an impact on children, then they tended to invest less in post-primary. So in that regard, some of the safeguarding issues that Tony is referring to and some of the wider child protection issues seem to be issues that they placed less relevance on than we would here. So within any context and in any country, there are points where you can see where they have prioritised and given support for, but there are other areas where we would have considered that our practice was as good as, if not better.
No, I was just to add, when we were talking about comparing with elsewhere, when we were progressing the proposals for the SEN review, we would have looked elsewhere, and indeed, I mean, England now has very different structures. So we did consider other jurisdictions in terms of developing, but what is our own proposed framework? I would also say we are tuned into we have representation on the European Agency on Special Education Needs. The Department funds representation on that, and that is a forum which allows there to be a sharing of good practice across Europe. And indeed, you know, some countries have looked to us to see how we are doing it. So there is engagement, certainly as we progress with the policy development.
Can I just add, Chair, one of the things which happened recently through the Children's Partnership was a review of young people's participation in the process, particularly those with additional needs and disabilities. An independent review was undertaken. That review report was presented at a European conference in Milan as an exemplar of young people's participation in the planning process. So there are areas that we actually are ahead of in terms of European practice, but I think the point that's been made is that it's making that consistent across all parts of the service.
But it does all get disseminated down in your... That's very good then. Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. Can I apologise for missing your briefing? I was supporting Una Cruden in her attempt to raise awareness in ovarian cancer, so it was a very worthy cause. I know a lot of my questions probably have been answered, so maybe you could let me know if you've answered them already. Eddie, it's a change from questioning you in organ donation, so I don't think you need to look quite so worried. Can I start by asking you the availability, your view on the availability of occupational therapists and special support workers in school, especially primary schools, to enable them to appropriately deal with the special and specific medical needs of children? Because I know through my office, the cases I've worked with, where it's almost impossible for parents to secure the assistance of an OT at their child's school because simply they aren't available. That leads to a real sense of frustration and almost a sense of betrayal by responsible agencies. That's certainly how the parents feel. In your view, are things getting better or are they getting worse?
It might be useful to describe perhaps the opportunities for access in occupational therapy services. You're quite right in that we have occupational therapists within the school environment. We've also got occupational therapists within the community clinic environments. I wouldn't be happy to make a comment on whether I think things are better or worse. What I would say is they're different. The level of input in the various schools is not consistent. And that is a message that is very clearly coming through and one that we are hearing, and that will form part, is forming part of the work that we are doing. So we will be looking as part of our benchmarking at the resource that is in each and every school in Northern Ireland, how it's being utilised with a view ultimately of agreeing with partners, with families, with the children themselves, the right model of care. Once we've decided on what the right model of care is, we can make a judgment then in terms of whether the resource is adequate or inadequate.
It just seems to me parents shouldn't have to fight so much for their children, because all too often they do feel they have nowhere to go, and it is such a sense of frustration, as I've said, with them. I am concerned myself that in many cases the needs of the child are almost taking a back seat to the administrative process with the trusts, and that's just simply unacceptable. Would you agree then, Michelle, that there's a lot of work to be done to put proper support? I know you spoke of benchmarking, but we do need proper support mechanisms in place in the schools where pupils need it. Surely anything other than that, we're not helping our children achieve their full potential. So I know you've been careful with your words. You've said it's different, but we do need that support for the parents. And I know across Upper Bann and the constituency I represent, it's dire. It is dire, and that's what parents are telling me. And please redress this, because it simply isn't working for many parents. Can I ask? Does anyone want to answer? Can I ask another question? I'm speechless. In a written answer, the Minister has told me that he is unable to place a duty on boards to hold reserves to meet the medical needs of pupils prior to statement, and we all know, and we're well rehearsed in the very lengthy process going through a statement. He said support cannot be finalised until, in his words, full consideration of each child's individual special needs, educational needs, involving close cooperation between all agencies concerned, including health professionals, subsequent consultation with the child's parents. Given the delays in the process and the issues regarding the cooperation between the agencies, could we not have a more sensible approach, a sensible solution? What's your opinion on this?
Sorry, was that in relation to the issue of the statutory obligation on health? That is something we possibly did touch on earlier. We were explaining that, you know, in the context of the consultation on the new sound framework and in the proposals arising out of it, the Minister for Education had acknowledged that he, in his legislation, couldn't impose a statutory obligation on another government department and another government minister, and certainly I think colleagues had explained the Health Minister's position regarding he felt that there was adequate obligations on his department in terms of meeting the needs of children. Perhaps one of my health colleagues can reiterate that.
There is a very strong underpinning for children's services by legislation, particularly in health. Key in that it would be the Children's Order 1995, which premises that the delivery services should be on assessment of need. It also acknowledges the individuality of children within that. Within that assessment of need, that then is a duty or a power for a trust to undertake that assessment. The outworkings of that then becomes a statutory duty if that assessment indicates that a need requires to be delivered. How that is delivered then is up to basically the best outcome for that child. And just in terms of health, my remit is children with disabilities. We just short, I think the last time I looked at about 800 separate disabilities in Northern Ireland. Each one will bring a specific medical requirement. So I think it's about actually getting it right for those children. And there may be some delay in actually working out what is the best medical advice for them. But I suppose in some cases that's a constructive delay as opposed to just an obstructive delay.
Well, can you maybe give us a time scale indication of the current time scale, which parents and pupils have to wait to go for the whole statement process to be implemented?
The statementing process is obviously within our remit, and at the moment the current statutory timescales are 26 weeks, which Claire had explained earlier. There are portions within that where there's minimum periods that have to be taken for certain stages. The new SEM framework that we're hopefully bringing forward shortly in the Assembly will reduce that statutory timescale to 20 weeks.
We're going to go into this in more detail in the next brief.
Yes, we'll be able to go into that further in the next session, yes.
Okay, thank you.
We touched on the occupational therapists before I go to Maeve. Are there difficulties in hiring occupational therapists all over? Is it a major problem? And is that something we're dealing with now or just assessing?
May I just clarify, is your question relating to occupational therapy provision in schools or occupational therapy provision per se?
It's both, because I get the impression it's needed at both levels, and the information we're getting is it's hard to find them.
Okay, well, they are there.
Right.
And I assure you they are there. But I will say we have had issues with access in terms of how quickly people can access occupational therapy services. I can't say we're not happy. I can say we are not happy with that position. The Health and Social Care Board and the Public Health Agency are working together in partnership with the Trust to understand the reasons for the delays in access against the Minister's targets of 9 weeks access from referral to the commencement of treatment. So we're working very hard to understand what those issues are and to address them. So there are issues accessing some of our services.
So what needs to be done to resolve that?
We have a very robust plan in place. One of the pieces of work we are doing is actually looking at the amount of provision in situ at this point in time. We're mapping every single member of staff, we're mapping our vacancy levels, etc., etc. And that's progressing now.
Okay, Maeve.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies also, folks. I was at that other event. Just specifically in relation to the statutory obligations, and I'm listening carefully to what you're saying, that the Department of Education can't impose a statutory requirement on health, for example, or on any other department. But I'm just wondering, with that in mind, because the recommendation had been about if the service level agreements or memorandum of understanding weren't working or weren't delivering, are we saying by dint of that these memorandums aren't delivering, or service level agreements between two departments?
I understand that there is good cooperation on the ground between health and education. I'm not sure if Claire or Kieran want to comment on that. So, I mean, I think when you get to on the ground, there is good cooperation.
But sorry, maybe I'll just phrase that differently. The briefing papers that we've received previously, it has been reflected on that in terms of the review, we need to look at either service level agreements, memorandum of understandings, and where they are not delivering, look at the statutory responsibility. We're now hearing statutory responsibility can't be imposed. So I'm trying to tease out whether the current systems in terms of either memorandum of understandings or service delivery models are working, in your views.
Well, I mean, that's right. We've settled that we can't impose any additional statutory obligations. What we are going to be doing is putting an obligation on boards they must seek assistance from health authorities where they need to in relation to providing for children with special education needs. As the outworkings of the proposals from the review, we also have put in place early years pilots across the region, and those are based on a multidisciplinary approach, cross-agency approach. So I wouldn't say that they're not working in that we're currently increasing the amount of engagement and elements across the piece to try and improve the multidisciplinary approach. Where there may be difficulties, which I'm hearing from members, is maybe in relation to the content of statements, the non-educational provision, perhaps, where there isn't an obligation on health to necessarily provide.
Right, Chair. Maybe can I ask it in a different way? Are the MOUs in place on a regional basis, or with individual trusts and ELBs, or what can be done to actually strengthen? Because ultimately what we are faced with then is situations where, for example, the College of Occupational Therapists are funded by health to meet health targets, not necessarily education targets.
I think that when the outcomes of the SEN review become clearer, I think we need to look more carefully at a strategic look at how we can ensure the effective delivery of services for those children where health needs have been identified as part of their statement of special educational need. Currently, at individual education and library board area, there would be ongoing discussions with the local trusts in relation to what particular children need. Those are very explicit discussions on an individual case basis, because you must bear in mind that the statutory assessment process is also reliant on medical advice. And as part of that medical advice, we will have occupational therapy reports, speech and language therapy reports, physiotherapy reports. So the fact that individual children have been assessed by health professionals as requiring specific support, it's not as if this is a process that's separate from the actual professional input of those individuals. What needs to happen further to the point at which the statement is ratified, is an explicit mechanism to ensure that the needs as specified in the statement are met. So in that regard, whether that is something that's done through more robust arrangements at an individual ELB level, but there would be merit in having a strategic framework in place in terms of connect between DE and DHSSPS in relation to it.
And certainly, I would just add there, as Claire has mentioned, through the Code of Practice, which sets out what is required of schools and boards and other relevant authorities in terms of the meeting the needs of children with SEN, does explicitly already state the role of, health professionals as well as education professionals, and certainly the Minister has indicated that in moving forward, and we'll need to develop a brand new Code of Practice, we will be working closely with health colleagues as well as education colleagues, because we want to set all that out very clearly in that code. But perhaps, as Claire says, that's very operational, how the process works. Whether the Education and Health Ministers also want to set that in a higher context of an MOU or agreement, that's certainly something we can bring back to the Minister.
Okay,
Chair, sorry, can I just also make a comment that I suppose in terms of even and members have appropriately provided examples of where things haven't been working, and I think probably panel members have indicated that we need to get to and want to get to a stage where there's much more consistency. But there will be many examples where families and children are going through the statementing process, but there's significant support going in from Health and Social Care Trusts. So there will be many examples where that support has gone in at a much earlier stage, and hopefully then the statement will confirm that or add to it.
Okay, well, I'm just picking up, Chair, thank you. I'm just picking up on the fact that potentially through this process we will see, at the very least, a review of the Code of Practice.
Will definitely be a
but
new
there may
practice.
potentially be a more regionalised approach to a memorandum of understanding between the departments. Is that something that is likely to come forward?
Well, I think we'd have to consider what we would want in an MOU. I mean, I suppose it's a question of looking at where are the problems, where are the areas of concern, and certainly, as Eddie mentioned earlier in his presentation, we're hoping to establish a health education strategic liaison group. And perhaps that would be the forum at a more strategic level to consider as we're developing the outworkings of the framework and the Code of Practice. Does it need to be supported by something else at a higher level?
Okay, and just on a similar point, Chair, it was referred to in relation to the non-statutory duty around the Children's Order, in terms of that being the legislative framework. But, is the review that the Children's Order is now 1995, it's almost 20 years old. Some sectors would suggest it's well out of date, particularly when we're dealing with issues around, for example, child sexual exploitation and issues like that. Is there a view that there will be a demand, request, recommendation that legislation needs to be examined?
Well, as you know, there's, particularly in relation to child sexual exploitation, there's an independent inquiry going on at the moment, and it will consider right across all sectors issues around child sexual exploitation. And certainly, from our perspective in the education sector, we will be responding to whatever recommendations come out of that. I'm assuming my health colleagues will be the same, but that's ongoing at the moment.
Sorry, and I was just using that as an example,
Right.
but as an example of how the legislation can be perceived as being dated, given that it is 20 years old. And I'm wondering, is there thinking going on, if that currently is the obstacle to ensuring that there's a statutory duty on both departments in terms of cooperation or coordination, then it could be perceived as an obstacle, is what I'm saying. And I'm trying to tease out, is there thinking going on in terms of the review that might actually recommend that legislation is
We
examined?
have already engaged with the Department of Health on that particular issue, and I believe it predates me, but apologies if I haven't got it right, and I'll clarify it afterwards. But I understand that the Minister of Health had already indicated that he didn't propose to amend his statutory duty. I believe that's the current position.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, you should be aware there are discussions ongoing at the minute in terms of legislative reform within DHSSPS in terms of the Adoption and Children Bill, within the current Assembly term, and then further review for the next Assembly term. And I know in terms of that there are some discussions, not specific around this, but relating to children with disability and how we might look at enhancing some of that provision.
And can I just ask finally then, Chair, because we are facing into a major piece of legislation around mental capacity, and I'm not suggesting there's a direct correlation between special educational needs, but a very vulnerable group of people in our community. And I'm just wondering again your views on the fact that the current legislation is going to exclude under-16s.
The mental capacity legislation, well, I mean, that's been taken forward by Department of Health colleagues, so I'm not aware of the precise details. But yes, I understand it is excluding under-16s. I think they determined that further work was required in terms of children. But I'm not aware of the detail. Well, we need health colleagues to confirm that.
Thank you. Karen, were you trying to come in?
Sorry, I just wanted to make the point that, you know, there's perception that there isn't a lot happening on the ground, but there actually is a lot. I think when you look at things like the cross-departmental ASD strategy, it reflects the fact that for some particular time we've worked conjointly with our education colleagues in the area of autism with our children, and certainly part of our diagnostic clinics, our educational colleagues will be actually part of that process, so that there's consistency around the key agencies that are involved with children through that early stage and early identification. But we also acknowledge too that this isn't just about children with additional needs, that school is such a significant part of any child's life, and that's why things such as the Unicini framework were developed around the understanding the needs of children, and education were very much part of that process as well. So it's understand the context. I think we keep referring to the whole child, that a child is a child in the context of its family, its school, its environment, and society. And to not have reference to any of those particular parts of that child's life is actually not actually completing the full assessment around actually determining how best to meet that child's best assessed outcomes. So I think there is a lot of processes already happening that perhaps we're not that good about actually citing the cooperation and the working together.
Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
I've just sort of one or two little questions. The public health multidisciplinary support teams don't go to post-primary schools. Is that something? I mean, I know we touched on the fact that Finland didn't work with post-primary schools. Is it something that we review, or is there a reason why we don't go there?
We'll certainly be reviewing all aspects, and again, this is one of the issues which we'll be picking up in the joint working group with education. I think one of the issues for us is getting the focus on where we can have the greatest impact. But as we're finding out, as we go, for example, in a review of AHP services, we've got the opportunity and the need to look broader than current provision on each of these areas, and we will pick up these issues in that group.
Thank you. And last week, I mean, I mentioned it at the beginning when I welcomed you, when we were looking at visibility and vision problems, and we were told that in one case as many as, was it 40%, had difficulties with vision. And what an effect, because if it wasn't being picked up early, they may well be being treated for other difficulties. Is that something we need to be dealing with now? I mean, I go back to my point of urgent things to be picked up. And is it the same with deafness and with other mixes within it?
The first thing I would say is our ophthalmic lead within the Health and Social Care Board is actually looking into the issues that were raised last week. What I can share with you is we have a very robust and successful screening programme in place for vision. Screening uses National Screen Committee and the Royal College of Ophthalmology guidelines. So it's an evidence-based screening programme, and the Screening Committee actually recommends that all children between 4 and 5 undergo vision screening, and the Public Health Agency Nursing Department produced guidance for school nursing on vision testing and developed a training programme to support that. At this point in time, all Primary 1 children are offered screening by school nurses, and also P2 to P7 who haven't got a visual assessment recorded on the child health system are also brought into that particular process. That screening programme, pleased to say there are very good results from that. I can say that last year the uptake was in excess of 90%, which is the highest in the UK. It's an orthoptic-led screening programme, so the orthoptists work with the school nurses to ensure that those assessments are carried out. If abnormalities or concerns are raised, the children are referred then to orthoptic services. So that's the screening programme.
Is that screening at the same level? I've forgotten who gave the presentation last week, but he very much said that you needed a proper eye test right at the beginning that covered, and he only gave us 4 or 5 examples of different types of visibility problems. Is the screening process as thorough as it should be?
I don't know enough to be able to compare, but what I would say is this isn't the only way where visual issues are picked up. There is also a mechanism very earlier on where children perhaps are identified as having a high family risk. They're identified and they're fast-tracked through the system. Or children who develop abnormalities early are fast-tracked through the system. I can't really comment on the comparators between the two, but I'm sure that would be possible at a later date.
And on the back of that, I think many members were asking whether school nurses still existed or were in every school, because that would be another method of picking it up early.
It is the school nurses who deliver the screening programme, and they are available.
But we don't have them at every school.
I can't answer. I'm not sure. I believe there is provision.
Okay, it's a question.
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not aware of the arrangements for the provision of school nurses. It could be, I remember from my time at school, a school employed directly. I believe some school nurses that may exist, I think, still in some schools, but it may be that they are provided under different arrangements with health authorities. But what we could do is we'll confirm that to you. We'll find out specifically that issue and confirm that to you when we're responding to the committee on the other issues that you've raised.
Just to make sure nothing's falling down a hole and being missed out. Thank you. I wanted to return again just briefly to the occupational therapists, and I've really got to the bottom. Is it you said there's plenty of them, or that they're out there and they exist. Is it a financial constraint that is holding us up, having as many need?
I didn't really say that there were plenty of them. Probably, I would say they are there.
They're there, okay.
There are a range of reasons that impact on access, and I'm sure financial issues come into the mix. One of the things I would say about occupational therapy, as well as all of our services, one thing that we could really improve on is actually describing better the way in which we deliver the work that we do. There's still a perception that the allied health professions should be delivering one-on-one care, one-on-one treatment. We actually provide a whole range of interventions, be it through supporting teachers in the classroom so that we support all of the children. We call that universal approach, be it a more targeted approach where we identify children who are at risk perhaps of not being able to attain their educational achievements, and we input at that level. And then the third level is the specialist level, where we actually have the occupational therapist or the physiotherapist or any of the other professions actually getting in on a one-to-one largely with particular children. I do know that many of the parents prefer that one-to-one intervention, but in actual fact the evidence tells you that yes, that is part of the intervention that you need to deliver, but you also need to equip those who spend most of their time with the children, be that parents or be that teachers, etc. So yes, the occupational therapists are there, yes, they are delivering one-on-one treatment when it's required, but there is a whole other element of intervention I'm not sure that we are promoting in the way that we need to, and that's why the parental engagement is so important.
Okay, Sean?
Just on that point, occupational therapists would believe that they should be involved long before the stipulating process. If there were, there'd be a lot of preventative type of things that could be carried out. What's your view on that?
Occupational therapists and the other allied health professions have a very key role in health improvement and early intervention, and certainly Transforming Your Care identifies that as a key area where we need to progress. So yes, we need to do more to maximise the input of those professions.
Yeah, because I believe,
earlier on.
sorry, going back to your previous point, you know, the idea of educating the parent, teacher, and whatever else, and
absolutely,
you might, if that's gotten time, you might need it.
Well, that's absolutely right, and it's that whole philosophy of supporting the child at almost every interaction that they have. If you have an arrangement whereby you have an occupational therapist providing input for 1 hour per week, clearly you will have an outcome from that, which will be an extremely important outcome. But just think what you can achieve if everybody surrounding that child has a key role to play early on. And that is the key, early on.
We're going to hear presumably much more of this when you've finished your review of where we are. No more questions. But thank you very much for your time today, and it's a phenomenally important area, and we look forward to hearing more from you in the future. But please, I think the biggest problem we get from parents is they want not just the consistency, but they want the speed, they want the action happening quickly. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Caroline and Claire would stay, please. Anyway, thank you very much. We can move on. We've lost quorum at the moment, so we'll go back to assessing the last thing afterwards. Members, we're moving now on to the briefing on department support on children with learning difficulties. This was arranged following feedback from the all-party group on learning difficulties. The clerk's cover note is at page 122, and a briefing paper has been provided at page 129 in your meeting packs. Also included is the 2008 ETI evaluation of the transition arrangements from the special schools sector, further education, adult and working life. Caroline Gillen and Claire Mangan are joined for this evidence session by Bernie Doherty, Special Needs Advisor, NELB, and Francis Curran, Special Education Team, Access, Inclusion and Wellbeing from the Department of Education. Please, you have 10 minutes this time.
Yes.
And I look forward to it.
Thank you, Chair. The committee had already received our earlier correspondence, which we're treating as the briefing paper for the purposes of this session. I'd just like to say a few short words. The committee will be aware that the support for children with learning difficulties can be broken into two elements. Firstly, the strategy policy work undertaken by the department, and we touched on that earlier, and then secondly the delivery and support on the ground to children, which is done by schools and boards in conjunction with other health colleagues. In relation to the department's role, the current framework of legislation and the guidance has been in place for some time, dating back to the 1996 Education Order, and then from this flows the current Code of Practice, which we've been discussing earlier. The framework was then updated in 2005 by the Special Education Needs and Disability Order and a supplement to the Code of Practice, which, amongst other things, strengthened the principle of inclusion and emphasised the importance of working in partnership with parents. So really it's this framework that underpins the department's commitment to meeting the educational needs of all children with SEN, and certainly the support focuses on the individual learning needs of each child, which is a theme that's come through earlier today. It also embraces the fact that there's no one-size-fits-all approach for supporting children with SEN. There's such a broad range of learning difficulties that can affect any child, and even within those, the different degrees of severity. So there's a need for a broad continuum of the support that we provide. Whilst the review has recommended a number of changes to the current framework, it doesn't change those fundamental principles that I've just referred to. What the review does propose to do, though, is to build on the work that's currently being done by schools and by boards, but to introduce a more simplified process, more easily accessible and less bureaucratic, based on 3 levels of support rather than the current 5 stages. And alongside this, there'll be a greater focus on early intervention and building the capacity of schools, which Claire mentioned earlier today, in recognising and managing children with SEN. So I just want to mention briefly that the approach to early intervention, we're currently piloting that in early years settings right across Northern Ireland, with the aim of developing a future model of best practice for early intervention assessment and provision. That is being assessed by ETI. Interim findings are currently very positive. In parallel to that, there's the ongoing SEN capacity building programme in schools, which aims to promote further and develop further the delivery and collaborative delivery between schools and boards for services for children. We've had a series of conferences for principals and vice principals, and as Claire mentioned earlier, we've developed a SEN resource file and supporting workshops which give practical advice and strategies to teachers and schools to employ in a classroom setting. I would just particularly mention this capacity building programme also includes a leadership and management training for SENCOs, who are obviously key in schools, and that's currently being offered regionally to SENCOs in all grant-aided schools throughout the 5 boards. The training, which has been planned and developed regionally, is to ensure a consistent approach, and we hope that helps SENCOs meet the requirements of the future role as we develop the new SEN framework and support them in change moving forward. So hopefully, I mean, that's a very high level of flavour of where the department is heading in terms of the strategy and policy, but I hope we are maintaining our commitment to this area of work. The Minister has stated publicly, indeed before this committee, that special education needs is a priority for him. Absolutely. In turning to the second element, which is the supporting children on the ground, the direct support by schools and boards, my ELB colleagues will be able to go into further detail in the questioning, but the statutory responsibility for securing provision for pupils with SEN rests with both schools and education library boards, and in the majority of cases children with SEN will be identified by school staff and who put in place strategies within the classroom. It is important to remember that. It's only if the school can't meet those needs at stages 1 or 2 of the current framework that the child would be moved to stage 3, and at this stage the additional support would come in, and guidance usually in the form of support from the education and library boards. It's at that stage that the ELB psychology service would often become involved as well. And then following the stage 3, if that following review or at some other point a child can be referred to statutory assessment either by the parents or the school or the board, and on receipt of advice from all concerned in that statutory assessment process, obviously the board may draw up a statement which outlines the provision necessary to meet the special education needs of the child. It's difficult to detail all forms of SEN provision currently delivered by boards and schools, as they are tailored to very individual needs. Our letter to you tried to highlight the main types of support at preschool, primary and post-primary, and also in terms of the specialist services available in boards in relation to autism, social, emotional and behavioural difficulties and transitions. So, as I said, as we answer the Q&As later, Claire and Bernie will be able to perhaps give more detail of those particular supports on the ground. I just wanted to finish by saying that, as we've heard, I mean, we know that aspects of the current SEN framework do operate extremely well, and the educational outcomes for children with learning disabilities has greatly improved over the last 10 years, but we're equally aware that there are elements of the system which aren't operating as well as others, and that is why we've taken forward with the review, and we are committed to looking at those areas and moving forward with schools and boards to achieve those improved outcomes. So that's the positive direction that we're heading in, and obviously it's an important time in terms of providing for those children with special education needs. That's their focus and providing for them to meet their full potential is at the core of where we're heading as we move forward.
Caroline, can you expand on those, on some of those areas?
Pardon?
Can you expand on some of those areas that you said?
I think certainly, I mean, I wasn't in the department at the time when the consultation for the special education needs framework was going on, but as we mentioned earlier, there's been issues around timescales and the complexity of the system in terms of the statementing process, and the current proposals for the new framework are looking to address those in terms of reducing the timescales required, allowing parents at certain stages, for example, at the moment, say, for example, in the statementing process, they have 29 days or 22 days to agree to an assessment being made. They can waive that if they're content. So the current system self-imposed certain periods of time. Those are being reviewed, and obviously we're reducing the time frame to 20 weeks. I mean, that's one technical element. Yeah. The other parts around the early intervention are very important, and the capacity building, and also to strengthen the requirements on schools and particularly on boards of governors to provide for children with SEN, because the vast majority of children with special education needs, their needs are met at school, and therefore it's incredibly important that schools do meet those needs, but also that we build schools' capacity to meet those needs.
Do you see any difficulty with the governors in making it more of a statutory role and putting more when they're all volunteers?
Well, that's obviously, I mean, the role of a Board of Governor is absolutely crucial, as we've seen in a number of areas, both in terms of performance and financial issues as well as this important issue. I think there'll be an issue of supporting governors, and I know the department at the moment is developing a governor support programme, and certainly what I would like to do as we move forward is link in with that work in the department, that when this comes forward, these new statutory obligations come forward, we would support governors in terms of what that means and how that should be met. I mean, the SENCO training is particularly important because that's already preparing SENCOs for the new framework and the new recommendations or the new requirements on schools.
And will that be provided by the library boards? Or centrally?
The current training has been developed and provided by the library boards. I mean, Claire may be able to elaborate more on where it currently is at.
Over the past number of months, there's been a leadership framework put in place in relation to SEN, and that has been a common training framework that has been delivered in each of the 5 education and library boards. So that was an important part to bring consistency to the support that we felt all schools needed to have in relation to this. So that's been disseminated board by board.
Thank you. Okay, Joanne.
Thank you, Chair. Caroline, thank you for your briefing. Could I just focus on preschool issues for a moment? And your briefing says that boards have developed a comprehensive range of services, including, and I quote, advice, support, training to nurseries and some playgroups to support the child's effective inclusion in mainstream preschool settings. How effectively, in your view, has this been working for pupils and parents?
Can I say maybe there are 2 strands to this? Firstly, over the past 2.5 years, the department funded early years capacity building projects that have been operating in each of the 5 boards. At this point in time, the pilots are focusing on a subset of the preschool and nursery provisions in each of the board areas. The focus of that work has been to identify common areas of SEN need that had particular relevance to the early years population. So whilst the programmes across the 5 boards have certain differences at this stage, they have tended to focus on language development, meeting the needs of children who have emergent issues around behaviour. And the third aspect of it has been around areas such as autism or high incidence SEN conditions. All boards have also provided support to the early year settings in relation to assisting early year settings understand the statutory framework. In other words, what are the stages associated with special needs support and how can they more expediently access them? At this point in time, the interventions, there have been significant aspects of those programmes that are important in terms of early years. For example, it's been recognised that having early conversations with parents about emergent need should happen earlier, rather than working on the basis of let's wait to see what happens when he or she goes to primary school. So I think what we're trying to encourage early year settings to do, with appropriate support and skills, is to have more meaningful early discussions with parents in terms of not only recognising that there's a need, but putting support in place. The pilots are currently still ongoing. The interventions will be evaluated, and we have a regional manager associated with the early years pilots who will be preparing an evaluation report that should be ready by December 2014. Separately from that, over the past number of years, educational library boards have developed early years support as part of discrete SEN services within the boards. For example, a number of the boards now would have early years support that would relate specifically to speech and language, or to meeting the needs of children with autism who are in early year settings, or meeting the needs of children who have other early identified needs. The issues around that are about the consistency with which it's provided and clarity in terms of the model of service delivery. But hopefully, as we move forward with this work, we can bring enhanced coherence to the service delivery framework on a regional.
Okay, I agree with all you're saying in theory. It's getting worked in practice. You say in some cases, the briefing says in some cases children have statements of SEN in early years. Can I ask what proportion, and do you have the figures of this? How many?
I don't have them with me. I don't know.
I do have statistics. I'm not sure whether they'll. In preschool at the moment, the total pupils with special education needs is 869 out of it. This was the stats for 13-14. So that makes it 10% of the total enrolment at preschool. 10.4%. Now that would be at stages 1 to 5. The children with statements at preschool, there were 39 children with statements, but 869.
So
overall.
10% of preschool children have statement. How are
No,
those?
10% of children at preschool are identified as having SEN, but that is across the whole stages 1 to 5.
Okay, is that, do you see that increasing, or, you know, obviously, as you, Claire said, early intervention is crucial. It's key, because if these measures need to be picked up at preschool, because I've helped so many parents that have found it almost impossible to get the support once their children are primary school level. So, can you take us through then? I know you've spoke about the pilot schemes and everything you're doing, but it is so crucial that their needs are identified early.
In certain early year settings, board services would still provide support to those settings, even if the child does not have a statement of special educational need. And the reason why we do that is because there's a recognition that there's an identified need that requires support, but the child may not necessarily at that point in time reach the threshold for statutory assessment, because there's an evidence base around that. But if the setting has identified that there are needs, then we work to put support in place where it is possible to do so. The other aspect of it is that over the past number of years, in certain settings, the staff have acquired skills in meeting the needs of children with SEN need, and so therefore the capacity building that has taken place in early year settings is improving. One of the key issues in Northern Ireland in relation to SEN is that we have got better at identification over the past number of years, but we need to get better at putting interventions in place when we identify the need. And sometimes the interventions that need to be put in place for specific children, even in the early years, don't need to be complex, but they need to be delivered clearly and with confidence, so that the parent understands what's been done to meet the need. Now, separately from that, there's a cohort of children in early years who will have more significant needs, who go into the statutory assessment process. And in that regard, maybe Bernie would like to elaborate on what happens.
Just before you do that, I should clarify the statistics. It's always good to read to the next row down in the table. Those figures were for preschool. For nursery schools, there's separate figures which for the percentage of children on the enrolment with SEN, which is again across the whole stages, it's 24.7%. And that's 72 of those children would have a statement. So 39 of those children would have a statement in the preschool settings, which is the funded settings, and 72 in the nursery schools. Apologies for that.
Okay. You say certain early year settings. What do you mean by certain early year settings?
It really depends on the provision that's already in that setting and the support that's in that setting, in terms of whether the child would require anything over and above because at the end of the day, there's the assessment of the needs of the child, and there's also the assessment of the context in which the child is being educated. So in some situations, additionality in terms of further resourcing may not necessarily be required. In other words, you don't need a statutory assessment to put the measures in place. In other instances, by virtue of the number of children in that setting, or the number of other children who have emergent needs in that setting, the context is taken into account, and in that regard, additional support would be deemed to be appropriate.
Because that's where I am seeing through my constituency office the frustrations. Once, if it's missed at a preschool setting, then the frustrations as the children enter primary school level. So it is crucial to get that support as early as possible. Thank you.
I mean, my feeling again through constituency offices is the flexibility that you're talking of doesn't actually exist in quite that way, and that quite often it is just the school gets a no, and rather than looking at the flexibility of how the school is handling, you're then fighting the no rather than would you come and reassess the school and the context to see if the child is getting what. I mean, that's my feeling getting from it, that all you're saying is absolutely right, but I don't think it's coming down in practice.
But sometimes there are schools that will make, and I'm going to ask Bernie, who works specifically in the area of special education, to comment in detail on this. Schools will sometimes submit evidence, but it's insufficient. It's not sufficient to enable an informed judgment to be made. So whilst the parent might be informed, we have forwarded information to the board and the response has come back no. Sometimes what has been forwarded to the board is not sufficient for the board to make an informed decision in terms of whether the child really meets the threshold for statutory assessment or not. Some people will see that as an impediment. This is just one more milestone that we're going to have to struggle with. But in reality, sometimes the evidence that's needed to inform special education to commence the statutory assessment process needs to be provided, whether it's medical reports, whether it's other information that's relevant to the developmental progress of the child. And in the absence of that, we're then bringing children into a statutory assessment process for which it may not necessarily be appropriate for them in relation to the interventions that they ultimately require. I don't know, Bernie, if you want to.
Well, I think you've covered a lot of it, Claire, but in terms of statutory assessment, we would be looking for evidence that the child's needs are very severe, and that would be in the form of medical reports or educational psychology reports, and also that there's been evidence that the school has tried different interventions and that those have been unsuccessful. So it's not just the sort of psychometric evidence from an educational psychology report, but evidence in some cases that the school have tried and have been unsuccessful in the measures and that the child is not making progress. Now, if we get that evidence, then we can progress to statutory assessment, but in the absence of that evidence, we can't make that step forward.
So really it comes down to communication and making sure we're asking the right questions. So that's what's needed.
Communication and understanding of what is needed, and appropriate referral to those agencies who can provide advice and reports to guide the school and to make recommendations about the interventions, and for schools to try those interventions and then, if they're unsuccessful, provide evidence to the board that we've had these recommendations, we've put them in place, but this child is still not making satisfactory progress.
Comes back to, I mean, the main thing is time and speed then on the back of that, because if it takes long. Anyway, we'll move on, Chris.
Thanks, Chair. I suppose some of this, certainly for myself, came out of the all-party group on learning disability, and the one story of a young girl who wanted to go into social work. The careers advice was like, no, you can't do that. And different options, no, you can't do that, no, you can't do that. You have to go this particular way. So some of my questions are going to, I suppose, concentrate on that transition between the school and the employment and further education, or whatever it might be. Where are we with careers advice? From what I gather, it tends to be quite exclusive. What you better shouldn't look at doing these things, rather than, well, this is the sort of support that you may need if you want to be a social worker, or this is. I don't know if you want to comment particularly on that one incident, or just in general with careers advice with our young people with learning difficulties moving on.
Well, the department, I mean, as you know, funds education or ALB transitions coordinators to provide the link from when the child reaches 14, a transitions plan has to be put in place, and then that's reviewed regularly. So education transitions coordinators will assist pupils with statements in relation to transitioning into whether it's work or further study. The Code of Practice also recommends that any non-statemented pupils with SEN approaching the age of 16, that boards and schools should also seek to provide appropriate help and guidance. The department has been engaging with DEL on it, did a review of its career strategy and picked out of that particular issues around transitions for children with learning difficulties. The most recent development has been falling out of the interministerial group on mental health and learning disability, where DEL are chairing a group specifically looking at transitions, and that has education, health, decal, I mean a whole host of departments, and it's specifically looking at any particular gaps in the system, and then we'll make recommendations across departments about what needs to be done. We have also commissioned ETI to look at the area of transitions again, to identify how it's operating in the education system, with a view to again feeding into that interministerial group and ourselves taking forward any changes. So we hope that would pick up any issues.
When's that due to?
It's due to come out in the coming months. They're just finalising the analysis of it.
Yeah.
We'll be.
I'm sure we'll share that with the committee.
Okay.
Yes, we'll do.
Okay. Not a problem.
Can I say there is a wider issue about careers advice to young people in general?
Yeah.
And I think that some of the specific issues that may well be identified in relation to young people with SEN needs are a very specific subset of a wider issue, careers advice in general.
Yes.
And so I think it needs to be seen within that wider context.
No problem. What percentage, hopefully you have this figure here, what percentage of young pupils with special educational needs find themselves not in employment, further education and indeed training when they leave school?
I don't have those figures. I have percentages around qualifications for children with special education needs leaving school, but certainly see if we can get those figures. Just don't have it with us.
Same with the targets even, is there targets that, again, they may, can come back to us on the targets perhaps?
Certainly will.
Not a problem, thanks.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Sean? Sean, sorry.
Sorry, Chair, sorry. Going back to something Joanne said, and I think we have to acknowledge that the SEN review is actually addressing the needs of many young people out there, but the people that present at our office or whatever are people that are having particular issues with it. And many of those people, their experience has been sharp contrast to what you say, Caroline, or to what Veronica Bentley said in her letter to us, and there, where she talked about the key objective of this revised policy was ensuring that the SEN support the needs of all children and young people are met. And then going on to a point you made, Claire, about the 30% that really with better identification. Where we are a bit behind is in terms of putting intervention in place. And really coming to my question really is, and it's related to what I said at the very beginning today, in our nursery schools, up to 30% of our children are presenting themselves with language acquisition problems. What is being done about this? Considering in my own area there's not enough, they have less speech therapy provision than they had in the past.
Well, maybe can I say that when we look initially at early years children who have language difficulties, there are issues in relation to children's language development at the moment, which is related in a sense to children's early experiences in terms of contact with parents, contact with peers. In other words, there are probably more children in the early years presenting with language delay, and that's partly related to the fact that children are using more technology now, even in the pram, and there are less opportunities for peer-on-peer or parent and child engagement. So part of the issues that nursery and indeed Year 1 teachers are referencing more and more often to board officers are issues around language delay when children come into early years and P1 settings. Now that's quite different from children who we would identify as having potentially language disorders. That would be the cohort of children who are more likely to be referred to speech and language therapy services. In the early years, it's sometimes very difficult to discern the difference between delay and disorder. But a very simple rule of thumb is that the more exposure that children have to language opportunities in the nursery setting, you tend to find that those children whose primary need is around delay do make progress. The issue is, and we know that from other evidence, that if you have a delay at 3, then it takes longer than just nursery and P1 to resolve that. In other words, there are residual issues associated with that that are therefore more likely to impact on literacy later. So to answer your question, we need to certainly identify issues, which we are doing, but I think we need to have the confidence to put in place early intervention frameworks that aren't necessarily of a very specialist nature, because most children will actually respond to those interventions and do not necessarily require the higher level, more specialist input.
But having said that, I think, the primary principals that I would speak to could discern whether they needed the higher level help or not. And, they feel very much that with less availability of speech therapy is causing a major problem to them.
I think that I've had many discussions with speech and language therapists over the years, and with the professional skills that they have, they would still say that, at the age of 2.5, 3, it can be difficult to discern those who have delay and those who have a disorder. So I'm not sure if the views of non-specialists in that area could totally inform what actually needs to happen in relation to specific cases.
But is there not an issue with the availability of speech therapists? If I go back to my earlier point of a child with a particular development needs, that parent only could have 45 minutes speech therapy between Christmas and now?
I think that there are specific issues that parents raise with speech and language therapy input. But I think there's also issues about the fact that, again, speech and language is a continuum. There's a continuum of difficulty there. For some young children in particular, the 45 minutes is actually to assist the parent in putting in place various strategies in the home context. It is a very different situation if it has been conveyed that it's 45 minutes one-on-one with the child. So, in other words, I can't really comment on an individual case, but what I can say is that the model of intervention in many instances is around imparting advice and support to the parent, particularly with younger children, or with children who are of nursery and primary age. It will sometimes be around blocks of therapy, maybe lasting perhaps 10 weeks, 10 sessions, followed by a break where the parent is given tasks to do, followed by further therapy if indeed it's required. but I think that the communication around what has been required, what is being delivered, and why it's being delivered in this way needs to be made more explicit.
Okay, thank you.
And are the resources there in place then as you identify more and more of this need?
I think, as in every area, there's always going to be pressure on resources. And in that regard, I think it's important that those children who need it most get it.
That was sort of what I was going to lead to next. It tends to be those that need it most, because if you've got a broad number who have a delay in speech, who won't be deemed as important as the others.
But I think what I'm saying is that those who have a lesser need should have their needs met in a different way, through the professional support that's available in the settings that the child is placed in. So it's not about saying that in the absence of that nothing should happen. I think we need to develop the confidence and the competence of staff in those settings to put in place interventions earlier, and to do it with confidence that it's actually likely to make a difference.
We come back to your communication. The schools need to know to ask for the extra help of the work to help the setting. Okay, Pat.
Just one more. Just one more. Sorry. It takes it back, Claire, to an earlier point in terms of the continuing professional development for teachers, and particularly in terms of SEN. While we're at many other meetings here, we're led to believe that CAS is really stretched at the moment in terms of the support that they can provide to schools, but they really only can provide schools that are near formal intervention stage. Is SEN in a different place?
I think that SEN is in a different place, and I think largely because the support that's delivered to provisions in relation to SEN is generally not delivered by CAS staff. Right. The SEN training that we provide is generally delivered under the aegis of what I know as Children and Young People Services. So in that regard, we believe that if it's going to be training on special needs staff would provide it. If it's training on autism, it's autism staff. If it's training on behaviour, it's behaviour staff. So there is a whole spectrum of input that has been provided at school-based level that we continue to deliver both at whole school level, because again we recognise we get more traction out of that than centre-based training, but we do both.
And I would just add that the department has a specific SEN capacity building budget linked to the SEN review and the rollout, so I mean, it's over and above anything that would be in the normal CAS.
And has that budget been maintained in recent years in terms of the comprehensive spending review?
The Minister has made very clear that the area of SEN is a protected area. Yeah.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.
Claire, I just wanted to ask you about this issue of language delay, and you've more or less answered most of the points that I had. Do difficulties associated with language delay effectively work themselves out naturally, or is there a need for interventions? And given that it seems to be a trend that's increasing, where does that leave us?
I think one of the areas that it leads us into is, and it's probably maybe not something that the Education Committee wishes to deal with, it may be other committees within the Assembly, it's the wider issue around antenatal support for parents, from the point of view of recognising the importance of language development. And I'm going to give very concrete examples in relation to this. Good. Even issues such as the type of pram that you buy. Does your pram, when the baby's in the pram, does it face towards you or away from you? Because if the baby faces towards you, in fact, most prams these days face in the opposite direction. So there are really early opportunities that potentially are being missed by virtue, literally, around such choices that the parents make in relation to that. And I think that's the kind of information that's it's concrete. It's advice that can be given, because I think that most parents do want to do the right thing for their children, and if some of those elements aren't complex, then they should be encouraged.
Just to add as well, I mean, the department has recognised precisely those issues around the early upbringing. I mean, it's slightly. The minister launched an Education Works campaign last year, publicity campaign, and the first phase of that looked at early years. And certainly, my early years colleagues, the messages that were being put out in that campaign is the importance of nursery rhymes, counting, very simple things that you should do with your children, which are all around development of language and communication skills. So, I mean, but as Claire says, it really the essential, it starts from birth. But we certainly have made some inroads in terms of communicating the importance of those simple nursery rhymes, engagement, not just sitting looking at the iPad, for hours on end. But it is a huge area. But if we make improvements, then obviously it will have a greater impact and further down the line.
Yeah, but just in terms of if it's noticed in a child, say between 3 and 5, or even in primary 1 or 2, that they're. I'm not sure if language delay would go on as long as that, but does it then require an intervention of some sort, or will it eventually just work itself out naturally?
In a number of the boards over the past number of years, we have received funding from the department in relation to speech and language, and we have used that funding to address some of the needs that you're referring to. In other words, young children who may never meet the threshold for therapy, or even if they did, would they necessarily access therapy? And so therefore a lot of the supports have been around assisting teachers and assistants in schools assess the language profile of the child, but more importantly to be able to put in place interventions around that. So in different area boards there are speech and language programmes that have been put in place in relation to years 1 and 2 to try to redress some of the needs of some of the children that continue to present as having difficulties. But can I say, I believe that this issue in relation to parenting also has a community focus, because if some of these messages can be conveyed clearly, the reinforcer is not just the parent but the wider family and the community in relation to affecting some of those changes.
Okay. Are briefs and campaigns being put together then to get this message across?
Pardon?
Yeah, that part of that Education Works campaign, I mean, as I said, it was rolled out in terms of early years initially and then into P1. It's been supported by materials with tips for parents at different stages. I mean, it's been done in Scotland as well and a number of other areas. We're not unique in terms of the parenting, assistance and advice. But yes, there are Education Works materials that have been produced as well. My early years colleagues would probably be able to provide further detail.
And those are some of the children that would also be benefiting from the nurture groups that have been set up and funded throughout the province at the moment.
Thank you. I just wanted to welcome all our visitors who've just come in. I haven't actually heard where you're from, but today we've had 2 briefings on special needs, one from the department and one from the health things, and how they work together to make sure that it all pulls together and works at the same time. So you're very welcome, but you're just on the tail end of the brief. I have one sort of further question to go into it. The department would like to find out the ETI, the inspection recommendations that were suggested, have they been put in place? And if I can go through, they were suggesting a wider range of post-school placements for children leaving special schools. They were suggesting a consistent treatment of the education library boards of special need pupils with moderate learning difficulties. Are all their recommendations slowly being worked through and put in place?
This is the ETI report of 2008. I don't have a copy of it with me, but in terms of post-school placements, I understand that quite a number of the special schools do work with further education colleges and voluntary and community sector in terms of arranging placements for children. I'm not sure if one of my board colleagues is particularly aware of any particular instances in that respect.
I think again it's the issue around consistency and also around the fact that there are some young people who leave special schools or indeed other settings who will have care needs when they get into adulthood. And I know that some of the issues that parents have raised relates to the fact that the level of the support that they require at that stage is less than what they would have had at school-based level. So in that regard, that's why the transitions officers within the ELBs have worked and are continuing to work with trust staff in relation to making appropriate provision for young people who transition at that stage.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I think no more questions from anyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your good work. So just for the committee, our guests today are the Dramara Rural Citizens Group, hosted by John McAllister. Anyway, very welcome again. Okay, would you like to summarise, please?
Chair, is it the case that the committee would like to seek an update on the allied health professionals and multidisciplinary support teams reviews, as I think they're at the moment, and in particular how those reviews will improve parental communication, build capacity among schools to deal with the statement process and constant interagency connectedness between schools, and also how those reviews will enhance occupational therapy and speech therapy services, whether they will lead to the development of regional memorandums of understanding and SLAs for the relevant health education services. Additionally, would the committee like to seek an update on the terms of reference for the Health and Education Strategic Liaison Group, which you heard about, obtain information on the early years SEN levels, as we got some information there. Additionally, seek an update on the ETI review of SEN transitions, which presumably is going to follow up on the 2008 review, which is included in your packs. Also, obtain the figures on for NEETs and the targets for attainment in respect of children in special schools, and finally, seek a timescale for the SEN legislation.
Anyone else?
Eddie mentioned earlier around the establishment of a task force between health and education.
Health Education Strategic Liaison Group.
Okay, are we asking for
terms of reference and an update on where it is?
Okay, super.
I think that covers about everything. I just there were two things that came from Claire Mangan. One was the careers advice, which she was keen to get across, where we needed a linkage with Dell. Was it on special needs?
I think, Chair, as you rightly point out, the Dell Committee are undertaking an inquiry into post-school SENS, so perhaps it might be useful to pass on the information we've received to inform that inquiry.
Chair, I think it would be useful if we had sort of touched on the figures of SEN students or pupils in preschool settings comparative to other years. You know, has there been a rise of diagnosis with children with special needs in nursery? I think that would be useful to see, because we do know, and as I said in the briefing, once they come to primary school, parents are telling me it's getting so difficult to get those special, you know, that statement. Yeah. So I think if we maybe have asked them to provide a breakdown of how many pupils and comparative to other years, is there an increase?
I was also concerned on how we got to the bottom of the comment about when we were talking about delay in language and those who have severe language difficulties, as to how we can get to the bottom and find out whether schools are really getting the help they need on the ground for the more moderate difficulties.
Chair, that
plays
into, I think so. In terms of those AHP and DST reviews, it's about helping schools and getting that interagency confidence and to develop their capacity to know what they ask for.
Yeah, okay. Happy? Agreed? Okay, if we can move on then to correspondence. Pages 160 to 232, we've got 13 items provided under correspondence. At page 208, you'll see a response from the department following the ministerial briefing on the Common Funding Scheme. The Department again declines to provide a spreadsheet showing the breakdown of the impact of the Common Funding Scheme changes at individual school level. The Clerk advises that the Department's claim that an offer of an alternative spreadsheet was declined is inaccurate. I propose that we obtain the information offered by the Department and seek the details of the common funding formula elements that were used to make the relevant allocations. Is that agreed? I wondered, should we, or is there a way of us, rather like we have Tony Gallagher as our advisor, giving someone the task of assessing what it is for every school? Because that...
Well, Chair, if the department will tell me the formula, and if they have the spreadsheet which says how many children there are at each school, I can work it out. So it should be as simple as that. But,
have you the time and the resources to do it?
It'll take about 2 seconds.
Okay, very good. Okay, well then.
Famous last words.
Okay, so we're agreed on the way forward. Okay, page 217. You'll see correspondence from the Department of Education in response to the committee's queries regarding appointments to boards of governors. Are members content to forward the correspondence to Ballysillan Primary School, who had previously written to the committee on matters relating to the appointment of governors?
Chair,
Okay.
also in tabled items, if you look at the letter that refers, they also refer to little booklets about advice for boards of governors, and just they haven't provided it, so it's in tabled items.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much for that. Thank you.
Chair, could I touch on the letter from the Department of Health confirming that schools currently cannot maintain a stock of spare inhalers? I have to say I'm concerned about this. We have raised concerns on behalf of Asthma UK that inhalers should be available in schools for emergencies, and as we know, legislation currently blocks this. I'm pleased to read that a consultation will take place on amending the regulations, but could we ask the Department what they're minded to do rather than simply conduct a consultation? Surely they would be should be actively moving to amend the legislation. It's the right thing to do, you know. It's vital for those children that need inhalers.
Jonathan?
Sure, don't disagree with doing that. In fact, you know, I'd be in agreement. What I think we need to be careful, because I was looking in there and reading that, is that what they're saying, these are prescription drugs which are provided by your local GP. I think what you will find in practice, because I know a number of schools carry this out, is that the families, in conjunction with their GP, will allow a spare inhaler to be kept by the school presently. I know that is done in the vast majority of schools. I think what we need to knock on the head is this idea that this can't be done. It can be done under present circumstances, and I think, you know, more schools need to be a bit more proactive around this issue, because we're talking about saving lives here, literally.
And there's no use just a consultation with no outcomes. We want to see that they amend the legislation to make it happen.
Okay.
Chair, just to be clear, just for factual accuracy, I'm sure members have got this anyway. As the member quite rightly says, the legislation permits the current arrangements where an individual child brings in a spare inhaler, leaves it at the reception, as my daughter does, as is regularly done. But what the consultation is around is the school getting its own supply of these prescription medications. So that's what the consultation will be about, but we'll write to the department in those terms, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Also, page 230, you'll see correspondence from the Chair of the Indent Panel offering to discuss interim findings on the review of home-to-school transport. Members content to schedule this briefing as soon as possible? Okay. Grant?
Sorry, Chair, actually, there's an error in the brief. It's Clerk's fault entirely. I think what the Chair was actually offering to do was to discuss having a briefing. I'm not sure whether they've actually agreed to do it. That is entirely my fault, Chair. So but I'll follow up with Sean Thorne accordingly.
Okay, thank you. I suggest we dispose of the rest of the correspondence as per the covering sheets, pages 160 to 161. Agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, yeah.
Okay. Anything else that anyone wants to raise in correspondence? Okay, thank you. The forward work programme, the draft forward work programme is pages 234 to 236, detailing meetings between now and the summer recess. At page 238, you will find details of the British Council World in Your Classroom event scheduled for Tuesday the 27th of May 2014 in the Long Gallery. Are members content to note the information?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Chair, members also content for the committee to issue an invitation to all other statutory committees to attend the event. It should be quite, if you read it, it looks pretty good. It's quite visual as well, so there should be quite a lot of, hopefully we're going to get quite a lot of media coverage for it. And yeah, it should be quite interesting as well. But it should be actually a little less. If you recall the STEM event, that was quite content heavy, I would say, with this one less content, and it's an awful lot more people and entertaining, I think.
Very good. Look forward to it. Excellent. Okay. On also on the 28th of May 2014, we have our meeting and the visit to Greenmount in Antrim. The clerk proposes that we arrange our visit to everyschoolagoodSchool.tv so as to allow members to attend the Department of Education Very Good Outstanding Schools recognition event in the Long Gallery at 2 p.m. That agreed? Good. And members, are we content to consider the terms of reference for our inquiry into the shared integrated education in next week's meeting?
Good.
Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So we're content with the draft. Okay, that's because I'm using yesterday's document. Okay. Also, members, please note that an informal meeting with Drumrah Integrated College is arranged for lunchtime on Tuesday, 13th of May next week. A light lunch would be provided. Can members please advise staff of their availability to attend? That's next Tuesday, 12:30.
What room is that?
Room 20.
And as a reminder anyway. Very good. Okay. Also, Brookborough Primary School and St Mary's Primary School, Brookborough, are visiting Stormont on Monday the 12th of May 2014 as part of their shared education programme. They've asked for a photograph with members at 12 o'clock, noon, in the Great Hall on the steps, if members could confirm the committee staff that they'll be able to attend. Monday the 12th, next Monday.
At noon.
12 o'clock. Okay. As part of any other business, as part of the ongoing professional development, Karen will clerk the education meeting on the 14th, next week. Very good. Okay. So we'll now move into private session. Recording off, please.